work that my sister and I do, we write Section 27 reports. Have you ever heard of those?
No.
So we basically work with offenders. And Section 27 reports, they're also called cultural reports. Although that's a little bit problematic because it's not just about culture. Section 27 reports are based on the 2002 Sentencing Act, which enables any offender to have a cultural speaker, which we think actually should be their family, or a cultural report written for them to help a judge come up with their final sentence. Does that make sense? So it's basically...
Like a translator.
Not so much a translator, but someone who was, and like for me, like I spend my days basically either at Mount Eden Prison or Parry or in court or video chatting with offenders. And we sit down and basically the way that the legislation is written is that they're looking for areas of deprivation. Those three areas are social, economic and cultural. So by social deprivation, if you think about, say someone, and we've gotten a few of these, especially during lockdown, say someone's beating up their missus. Social deprivation that might be in their past or in their upbringing is that they saw their dad beat up their mum, so domestic violence. So that's a type of social deprivation. Say someone gets done for stealing. They went and stole something and didn't pay for it. Again, if they were brought up in a family environment where, they were having to steal to put food on the table or climb the table, that's an example of economic deprivation. I guess where the cultural stuff sort of comes into it is, do these offenders and I just work with the men, my sister works with the ladies, were they deprived of culture? So did they grow up, for example, learning Samoan, or did they grow up learning Te Reo? Did they spend time on their marae? So by having a look at sort of those three areas, is there a causal link, or is there basically a link between what happened to them as kids that could help explain their offending now? And you can imagine if you grew up, and this is the big thing that I've picked up from it, is that the men that I've sat down with or going to see in prison, most of them will come from a fatherless home or a broken home. Most of them would have seen domestic violence. They would have been exposed to drugs and alcohol from a very young age. I'm talking 5, 6, quite easily. A lot of them were physically abused, sexually abused, and those can manifest in different ways. And that's not to say that if you were sexually abused, that you will go and sexually abuse other people, but that anger can manifest in other ways and basically force someone to do, from what I've seen, more violent crimes. Gang culture. I mean, our whānau, our Māori side, we have gang connections, and that's maybe why sort of the offenders are a bit more at ease with us. We know what gang culture is and to be a gang family as well. And again, if you take someone, and it's a bit like how we talked about before, sort of going back to sort of the deprivation that our ancestors or sort of suffering, all that sort of stuff. There's even more factors now that can sort of send someone the wrong way. And one of them is culture. Like I will say, a lot of the people that I've sat down with, if they didn't have a strong sense of their own culture, then they found that culture, they would find that culture, that identity in gang culture or drug culture or crime. Because culture is just a form of doing something, right? So it didn't have to. That's probably been the biggest thing for us in sort of doing this work over the last year and a bit, is that there are definitely things in someone's past that can help explain. Now, the reason why these reports are written as well is because there's actually a discount that's on offer with these reports. So basically, if you get in trouble, you go to a sentencing indication and the judge said, well, you've done this particular crime, you're going to get this number of years. If you put in an early guilty plea, that's 25% off straight away. If you do restorative justice, that's another X percentage off. These cultural reports, my sister and I, the reports we've written, not to sound like a dick or anything, but our reports have never not gotten a discount. And sort of that discounts range sort of between 10 to say 35%. So if you think about it, if someone...
Is that a cultural discount?
Yeah, basically for doing the Section 27 report.
What?
Yeah. So and the reason why lawyers will engage in it is that you might have someone that's facing X number of years. If you get your sentence under 2 years of imprisonment, and depending on how much time you've served in remand and that sort of stuff, you can get a non-custodial sentence, as in you don't go into prison, or you won't go back into prison, because some of these guys are repeat offenders. Now that, funnily enough, is one of the big criticisms of the report, because essentially you're giving these different avenues or discounts for offenders to get less jail time, or even be released back into the community or be placed on home detention. But again, at the end of the day, the way that the legislation is written is that everyone has has access to that. I mean, we don't just work with Māori and Pasifika. I've written reports for Asians, Africans, Middle Eastern people, and obviously I found the Africans, Middle Eastern people, and Asians especially, they're more migrants that have come over here, and a bit like our previous generations, they came here and they had to adjust to being in a new country, not speaking the language. They'll get on the drink, and then they'll have drink driving charges, all that sort of stuff.
So what does that fall under? That particular thing, the immigration one, what you just described.
Yeah, so that's probably a form of cultural deprivation, and that you're having to adapt to a different culture. I mean, it's I know what it's like to live overseas. Footy's taken me sort of all around the world, and yes, mainly predominantly Western countries, but I know what it's like to live around Asia and all that sort of stuff as well. And the way that people adapt into a new environment or a new society or a different culture, some of them grasp it with two hands and just run with it. Other people, if you can't speak if we moved to a country where English wasn't the main language, we couldn't speak the language, and we found it hard to get work, we might resort to having a few too many beers to deal with that sort of anxiety and depression. So I found, again, whether it's Māori and Pacific or our other immigrants that have come over from different countries, there is an avenue there for help to be offered in terms of these reports. But the other thing with what we do with our reports, it's not just about getting people off, if that makes sense. It's not about getting them time off or discount. It's actually sitting down with them and saying, are you really remorseful? Or are you just saying this so you can get a discount so you can end up in prison in bloody 6 months' time? I've found the people that, the men that have kids on the outside, whether they're like young kids or older kids, they're the ones that seem to be a lot more open to changing. Some of them, no remorse. So I'm like, well, bro, you ain't going to get much of a discount. It's not going to be enough. You're probably going to end up inside. So it's also about being real with people as well. Just because, you're Māori or Pacific and we can write these reports, if you're not remorseful, if you're not willing to make the changes, if you're not going to do the courses that they recommend, you're going to have a problem. You're going to end up going back into jail. A lot of them want to, because that's their safe place, right?
Yeah.
They're used to the wars. They're used to the schedule. They come out into the world and it's like, oh, there's no one to bring my meals. There's no one to sort of, keep me safe. And that's something else that I've sort of learned over our time doing this, because it's like, some people do want to be in jail because it's safer for them. Because out here in the real world, you have all this responsibility. It's not as easy for some people. And if they're part of a gang as well inside, it's almost a holiday for them, or it's a badge of honour. So it's been an interesting sort of journey to go on that with my sister, especially given her background as a lawyer, and then moving into writing these reports. But like I said, it's you go to the sentencing and you sit with their families, and and the hardest ones are where there are people that didn't quite realise that you're going to go to jail if you commit this particular crime, and it doesn't matter if you have a report or your early guilty plea, it's not going to be enough for you to go home with your family. And when they get taken off to jail and you see their kids crying and their families crying, their parents crying, it's like that's maybe when it sort of sinks in, and then they realise, oh, hang on, no, this is real life. Going into prison now, so crazy.